Welcome to This Week in the PNFL. I'm your host, Mark Hill, and along for the ride, little mix-up today, we have Dean Chambers and our co-commish, Richard Colacino, tonight. How you doing, fellas?
Very good.
I'm doing good, Mark. Glad to be here.
All right. So, as you guys know, we are in the middle of free agency. That was kicked off on Monday at noon. As we are recording this is Tuesday, so we're still moving forward, signing the free agents, and we have the draft coming up. So what we're going to talk about on this week's show, we're going to talk about the draft. We're going to talk about the free agency. We're going to talk about the points. I know that was a topic of you guys discussing with the points. Some are happy with the numbers changing. Some are not. I think the guys may talk about some trades and some other things that are going on. Then the second part, we're going to go in and talk a little bit of the PCFL, and then we're going to wrap it up for this week as we get close to the draft. So if you guys are ready, let's go ahead and get this thing kicked off, starting with Monday. So everyone was able to get their tags in before Rich had to go in there and take over your team, and we started our free agency. So I'm going to start with the man himself. What have you? What's your impression of the free agency going on this far, Rich?
Well, I think the biggest news in the free agency is not the free agents, but the restricted free agents. The big signing by Justin, by Chicago, taking away the tackle Burford from Jacksonville for 10 points. That's a pretty large number for a tackle. He is a very talented guy. He's going to be a number one tackle. But that's a lot of points, and it does kind of make me think like you probably could get a similar player a lot cheaper, maybe not as good, but something close. 10 points is a lot. A couple other restricted free agents, Garrett Wilson re-signed with Houston. I think there's a little bit of a bidding war right now on cornerback Evans, the Pittsburgh cornerback, who I think Jerry just bid up to 5 points. So the rest of the free agents, fairly standard signings, guys filling in holes, kickers, punters, and stuff like that. I mean, I didn't see anything too crazy. Nobody's been bid up. I think 2.5 points is the highest bid for a linebacker. No big deal. I don't know. What do you see, Dean?
Yeah, I'm seeing that. I haven't looked at that particular tackle that you were talking about, but 10 points seems like a lot. I mean, I know there were reaction to a few of the trades where draft picks were traded for points as well, and I don't know if it's the changes in the pool or changes in other issues that are driving that. I mean, as I was saying in the pregame show, a lot of these moves, the free agent acquisitions and the trades for draft picks involving points and players and draft picks really illustrate where the different team owners have very different ideas of how they're building and rebuilding and reloading their rosters and managing their teams. And we know that some of the teams are aiming to regularly rebuild and reload through the draft and I know I'm certainly doing that. And we know that some of the teams are looking to sign veteran free agents, trade for them, often trade fairly cheap for those players that failed their physicals that are playing their last season. We know that a couple teams kind of specializing in what I'll call rehoming of those players when the team that had them when they failed their physical kind of basically is finished with them and is willing to trade them away, and other teams take those players on. So we see a lot of different kinds of methods of managing teams going on with some of these moves. And I think the thing that's kind of uncharted because there's no objective standard really. I mean, we can to some extent have an idea that a third-round draft pick gets a certain kind of player of certain value, or that a player is kind of roughly worth a certain value in relation to playing. You can say a safety that's a certain level of talent is worthy of trading for a running back or a wide receiver or a cornerback or a linebacker or whatever, a certain. But when you talk about points, I mean, we all have different ideas of what the points are worth and how they translate into value. You know, what's a fifth-round pick worth? Is it worth 2 points? Is it worth 3 points? Is it worth 1 point? People disagree on that. But we see, maybe it doesn't set a precedent when a tackle like that is bid for 10 points or a third-round draft pick is traded for 10 points. And we're seeing some of these teams are trading some of these assets for points because they desperately need points. They've spent all their points trading players, and now they need some points to bid on a couple of free agents, or they need some points because they're afraid, or maybe it really is happening that people are bidding on their restricted tags, and they're going to need some points to match those contracts. You know, all of these different things people need points for. And, some teams are trading players and or draft picks to get points if they're short on points. And, it would be easy to comment on which teams may be managing well and managing not so well their points, especially, some teams are kind of chronically, let's just say, have low balances of points because of the way they've used them to sign a lot of players and, find themselves in a situation. Some teams have a bit of a surplus of points. I know you look at a team like Las Vegas, they've traded for a lot of draft picks over the last couple of seasons and rebuilt their roster with a lot of younger players, I think, to kind of reshape his team the way he wants it. But as a result, he doesn't have a whole lot of contracts to sign, and he's starting to kind of stockpile a surplus of points. He probably has a plan of what he's going to do with those points. So it's just interesting to not only look at what I'm doing with my own team and what kind of plan I'm trying to follow and improving my roster, but then to see what everyone else is doing too. And it's always interesting to see those differences.
And that does bring us to you, Dean. You traded 10 points for that. Or was it 10 or 12 for that third-round pick? So what's in your head on that trade? How do you evaluate that?
Yeah, there were a couple of points. I went into this offseason, and some people say this is the right or wrong way to think about it, so you can criticize it either way. But because of the number of rookies that I've drafted in the last few drafts and some of the trades I made, I went into this offseason, I tagged 4 players, and, the restricted tags are a gamble, and I had to spend 3 points to match that player that Jerry bid on. But he's a starting offensive lineman, so I need to keep him. The 3 points is cheaper than 6 points for a 3-year deal, so it's still a net plus. But in addition to that, there were 2 trades. I ended up trading 12 points for a third-round pick with Sean of the Giants. And, that's probably going to be a pretty decent third-round pick. And then the other pick was
10 more to Vegas, right?
Yeah, I believe that was Gish Yahoo.
Yeah.
So
that's a pretty good penny though for 2 third-round picks. I mean, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it is, and it might be a little more than I wanted to pay, but I had traded. I know I've been saying I'm not going to do this, but I think it will work in this case. I traded my first-round pick next year for an extra first-round pick from Pittsburgh, because I wanted to fill another spot and get another rookie in this year rather than next year with that pick. And getting 2 extra thirds doesn't quite make up for it, but those are still pretty good players you can get in the third round. So I think it does strengthen my holdings in the draft next year. And, I may have an opportunity to trade up a bit with those picks in the next draft. We'll see, but it at least gives me a little more to work with and still sign a pretty solid rookie class for next year.
Right. But me and you also have the conversation, what are these points worth? What's fair value for a third-round pick or a fourth-round pick? And that's the thing. It's completely uncharted because teams don't trade picks like that strictly other than a 6th and 7th round. That happens quite a bit. On the forum looking to trade my 7th-round pick points, right? A half a point, 1 point, 1.5, whatever. But to trade third-round picks or a second-round pick, or if someone ever traded a first-round pick, I don't know what the value is. I guess the value is what someone's willing to give you for it. I don't know.
You're right. And the answer you gave me was kind of on one level, the answer that I was afraid to get, but it kind of was the one I expected to get. And, none of us really know absolutely what the answer to that question is. We just have to, as we see more.
Which is why I would never do it. Like I told you, I would never make that kind of trade. Right. I never liked it. And this is a little insight into how I thought about trades. I never liked to put a price tag on one of my assets. Anytime I offered a player, a wide receiver, whatever, I would never say, because I see a lot of teams do it. I've seen Jerry do it, Justin do it, a lot of guys do it. And I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just not how I like to do it. They would say, a wide receiver, 8-year player, he's got a 2-year contract left. He's top, 20 in the league, whatever. I want a second-round pick or I want a first-round pick. I never did that. And the reason is I never wanted to limit what someone might give me. I knew in my head what I was thinking, but I wanted to get the offers and find out what you were willing to give me. Every now and then, I would market a player, and I would get a surprising offer back, something better than I really thought.
You make a good point there, and I know Jerry and a couple do that all the time. Post those long trade blocks. Even Steve does it at times. As many do that.
Yeah.
I'm expecting a second-round pick with this guy. I think this guy's worth a fourth-round pick. But I'll give you one example. Everyone can go look in the forum and see what I'm talking about. But there was one team who posted a list of players, didn't put those prices on like you're talking about, posted a list of players saying, these are the players I'm willing to trade away, send me offers. So a team sent him an offer on 2 defensive ends that were on that list. And this team said to him, you're probably going to recognize the trade when I say it. The team said, I will send you my first-round pick next year for those 2 defensive ends.
Right.
He was shocked that he was offered that much. He said, deal, and they closed it. Now, me talking to him on the phone, I said, how did you get that first-round pick? You sell him a bill of goods to get that? And he said, no. He offered me the first-round pick when I posted my trade block on the forum. And he said to me, I was going to cut those guys if they weren't traded.
Right.
They weren't in the team. They were gone.
Well, that's precisely why I never put a price tag on a player. I want you to tell me what the player's worth to you. And if you really want him, you'll make me a good – and if you make me an insulting offer, that's fine. I don't take it. I don't have to make it. I think the reason why people put price tags on is they want to close a deal. And I understand that. Sometimes you want to move players quickly. And you're more interested in a quick move than getting the most out of that deal. And I do understand that part too, and that's fine. But generally speaking, I tried to look ahead, and these deals were not deals that I had to make. I never made deals that I felt like I had to make. I had to close something. It was kind of like thinking ahead. I would try to think ahead 2 and 3 seasons of what I wanted to. Like, I don't want this guy on my team in that next year, the year after. I'm going to move him because I've got depth. I got plenty of guys coming up, and I'm going to move him, but for my price. And that's just how I approached it.
Yeah, and some of the times, and I've done this myself sometimes because I felt like I had to make a deal. Sometimes you put these players kind of on sale. You name a price, and, they must go fast. I even kind of tweak people, and I put out a list last season. I said Atlanta fire sale. I actually called it a fire sale because people were –
right.
That's like selling, that's like selling your goods at the dollar store, basically. And by the way, this trade, I think it was like a first or second overall pick that it ended up being.
Right.
And you probably know what trade I'm talking about. Some others out there probably, I'm not going to name the teams, know which trade I'm talking about. And it's, I've made some mistakes in trading before too, but we've seen some interesting trades. Let's put it that way.
And now, Mark, we don't mean to cut you all this, but
no, I'm just sitting here listening. I'm just listening and getting all the knowledge right now. That's all.
That's why you're seeing some. I don't want to say strange deals, but you are seeing some unique movement because of the points, and I do understand that. But really, Sean is a unique case. The Giants, he to nothing. He had no points left. So, he had, I think he made a great trade with you, Dean. I like Sean's end of that deal. I would never put 12 points on a 3rd-round pick or 10 points on it. I think I may have told Mitch this. I would trade you my third-round pick every year if you're going to give me 10 or 12 points. I'll give it to you every single season. Just give me the point because I value the points. I see the value in having the points to sign your own players. There is there's a big value in that, being able to sign players and sign some of your guys, your stars, long-term, as we discussed earlier. So that third-round pick, while he might be a good player, he's not going to be a star, most likely. In today's drafts, he won't be a star. 10 years ago, 15, 20 seasons ago, that third-round pick could be first-round talent. So maybe that changes the equation. But in the way Charlie's doing the drafts, I think, and I admit I haven't gone through the draft the way you guys have gone through it. I don't know what's going to be available in the third round, but I got a feeling that the 12 points for Sean, that's a home run for him. That's a lifeline you gave him. So good for him.
And I will say about that move in particular, I can't guarantee that I'll always offer an offer like that in the future. I mean, right now, I thought it made sense to do that, but
right.
2 seasons from now.
If you've done the work in the draft, I'm sure. Listen, I've spent 3 minutes in the draft. You've probably spent 3 hours. So maybe you're seeing something that there's going to be some players in that third round of first round talent, and if you can get a couple of those guys, then maybe it's worth it. That's fine.
Oh yeah, I have the pool fully scouted and my board is ready, but that picture for me may look a couple, and I already envision it's not that I'm not seeing around the corner, but 2 seasons from now, that picture might look a little bit better when I start having some of those rookies that I recently drafted, that's some of the better players, and then I'm looking at now I need some points to sign these guys to contracts, and that kind of trade may not be available. At that point, at that point, he wants to sell me a third-round pick for points, and I may be in a position of basically asking for the King's ransom because those points will be more desired for re-signing some of my players that I want to keep around.
And that's why the value of the points is so subjective because who knows? Every team is in a different position. You said Vegas, he's got 89.5 points right now. That's tops, I think, in the league. So he doesn't. I don't want to say he doesn't care about the points because he just acquired 10 of them, but he does care about the points. But he's not in points hell by any means. He can do a lot of things. He could be a little more frivolous with the points if he wants. Right. Whereas Denver, who's got 6 points, he has to be careful what he's doing. And Charlie's got 7 points, although all his players are signed and he's set. But 7 points is not a lot of points, and so he can't do anything crazy. He's got to be careful a little bit. He could. What if someone suddenly bid on his restricted free agents? Well, he might have to lose them, right? So
tackle you said came from Jacksonville.
What's that?
The tackle, the offensive tackle that Justin signed, Jacksonville.
Yeah,
that was the person. I haven't looked at the. Is Jacksonville low in points where he literally can't? Jacksonville
in a trade. I didn't understand this trade. I'll be honest. For Jacksonville, let me see. Where's this trade? He traded 10 points to Pittsburgh for a defensive end and a cornerback. The defensive end sample, cornerback Bryant. I didn't understand the trade. I don't like the trade for Jacksonville. The cornerback is a 9-year player. He's okay. He's fine. He's not a star. The defensive end, same thing. He's a good player, not a star. Both of these guys need contracts next year.
They're depth.
They're depth guys. Yeah, they're good depth players. They're not bad. But 10 points, that's the kind of depth you can get in free agency, or it's the kind of depth you can get in a better trade. To give up 10 points is excessive to me, and because of those 10 points, Jacksonville only has 11.5 points left right now. He signed a free agent, so he's got 11.5. So if he wanted to keep his player, he'd be down to 1.5 points. So he put himself in a bad position by making that trade with Pittsburgh. And listen, Justin wasn't. I don't know if Justin said, "Oh, Jacksonville just did that. Let me go hammer." No, that player, honestly, to be perfectly honest with Matt, Burford did not. He should not have been tagged. He was a player who Matt should have signed and taken out of that category. He is not that kind of player. You don't tag a guy restricted who has that much talent. He's a third-round pick, but he's got first-round talent. So
yeah,
that's a mistake.
4 points on a 2-year contract would have been very well spent points.
Absolutely. I mean, in fact, he's the kind of Burford's the kind of guy that you could basically sign long-term. If you have the points, you could sign him to a 7-year, 12-point deal and forget about your tackle position for the, close to a decade. So that's a mistake. And he put himself in that position by first making that trade for depth players with Pittsburgh. He threw his points around.
Either way, if he spends the 10 points to match Justin's bid, that's 10 points. That's a pretty expensive 3-year contract at 10 points.
It is, which is why he shouldn't have, which is why he should have just signed him to start with. Yeah. So, but that's where I think, didn't Mitch make a comment in WhatsApp about the people throwing the points around? And, again, we don't have, teams come, now again, I'll say that there have been 3 or 4 coaches who don't like that the allocation went from 53 to 52. I get that. I understand. But again, teams are still not in trouble. Points are moving around. They are shuffling. I agree. They are moving around. But nobody's in real trouble. Sean was in trouble. He made one trade. He's out of trouble. Just like that, he's out of trouble. And also what it's doing for you guys, whether you guys want to admit it or not, it's actually making you more efficient as a GM. It's forcing you into efficiency. You may not believe that. I'm not saying that was my motivation, but it's forcing you guys to actually figure this system out and saying, well, how do I best use my points to build my team so I'm not broke at the end of each signing period? So, and I can see it. I can see you coaches. I can go down the list, and I know most of you guys are doing a great job at being efficient with this system, which is why none of you are in any trouble. So if you want to know the direction of where the allocations are going next season, it's probably going to go down another point because, and Dean, we talked about it, I am trying to take points. There's 500 extra points in this economy, and I want to get down to where it was the first 10 seasons we began this system, which it was ranging between 200 and 400 for over a decade in this league. Mm-hmm. It was in that range of excess points. I want us to be back in that range again. So I'm the only way to take points out is to continue to lower the allocations 1 point at a season, and see you and watch you guys continue to be efficient as you continue to be. So you guys are defying, despite the fact that I'm lowering it, you guys continue to defy that lowered allocation. So there, by the way, when we started this in 2022 is when this point stuff began. The number 65 was thrown out there. It was a very arbitrary number for the allocation. There was no magic in the number 65. It was just a number someone threw out there. It could have been me. It could have been Charlie. It could have been Walter. I don't remember. I don't even remember how the system got, implemented to start with. But 65 was the number. There was no magic in that number. It was just a whatever. It was an arbitrary number. Well, I've discovered, that was way too high. It was way too easy for you guys. And back in the day, one time we had a carryover of almost 1,000 points in this for the teams. That's ridiculous. You guys were carrying over points so high that you guys were going to be fine for the next 10 seasons. It was way too many points being carried over. It was causing you guys to be able to sign every player you wanted and then spend whatever you wanted in free agency. And that's not the NFL model. Clearly, it's not the way it should be. So
players getting bid 20-something points at free agency. Like one of the get bid up to 20-something points, and it was
right. And if you recall, we had a couple seasons where James, who had 300 points at a peak, I think, and I think Justin had close to 200, where James bid some ridiculous amount of money on a couple of those rookies who got boosted. where he basically just takes them every season. I boost a few guys, and James Bay, I might as well just put them right on James' team right out of the gate because he had so many points that he was taking them because he would outbid everybody for them. That's not what you really want to see. That's not ideal for the league to have that. So that's why popping the balloon of these points a little bit, forcing you guys into more efficiency with your contracts, and still none of you are losing players that you want to keep. Not really. You're losing low-depth guys who don't matter anyway, who you should be cutting, as we also discussed, right, Dean? I mean, these teams who are addicted to re-signing their own players, when you should just cut them, send them to free agency, and go sign the guy for a point, like Sean just did, by the way. Look at the forum. Sean just signed tackle Cunningham for a point. Me and Sean went back and forth for 10 minutes, and I kept telling him, Sean, you have no points left. You have to cut him. He's got to go. And he's like, but I want to keep him. I drafted him. I like him. Sean, cut him and re-sign him. And that's what happened. He cut him. He re-signed him for a point. He now has a 3-year contract. So
I think that happens with a lot of us. We draft a player, we really like him, and you kind of get attached to them. And, well, I want to keep him. And sometimes you think it's risky to let him go and think he'll sign him for 1 point. You're kind of – there's like anxiety that someone else is going to put a 1.5 point bid on that player when you sign him for – when you bid 1 point on him. But, many times those players just get re-signed for 1 point, which is a 3-year contract. When you re-sign them for 1 point, that's a really cheap 3-year contract.
Exactly. 95% of the players get signed for 1 point. I think everyone forgets that. Not many players get bid. I mean, there's a handful of guys on the board right now who were bid up to 1.5, or 2. That's it. Occasionally, a guy out of nowhere gets bid up, and you're like, Jesus, why is everyone paying 5 points, 6 points for a guy, and you can't figure it out? That's just, I think guys get kind of caught up in the battle of bidding, and they don't want to lose and whatever. But it's not reflective of the talent. There's probably another guy in the free agent pool who's one attribute worse, right? So like you're going to spend 5 points on this guy or 1 point on this guy. Again, efficiency with your roster.
Yeah, and one thing to point out, and I posted this in the forum, in advice field, to try to keep track of that number, because you remember many seasons ago when I was in Washington, there was one season where I identified a number of players in free agency, and I signed a bunch of players at 1 point, and I had some draft picks. And by the time we finished free agency, we did the draft, and I remember you sent me an email saying, you got to cut down your number of players. You have too many. I had like 68 players of them. You can only carry 63. So I had been tracking how many players total I was getting. Ended up wasting points and or draft picks on players I would have to release so what I've done since then is always keep track of how many players in the system am I going to have and keep that number at or below 63.
Exactly. And you're not the only – I have seen seasons – it happens every season. I don't know if it will happen this year, but in past seasons, I have seen teams sign free agents, several of 2, 3, 4, 5 free agents. Then they go through the draft and draft 7 players, 8 players, and then turn around a week later and cut free agents that they just signed and threw the point away.
I've seen that because you posted, you sometimes posted in email or whatever saying these teams are, X number of players they have to cut down to 63 before training camp, before you can even sign all their players into the league finals. So, yeah, exactly. I see. And that's like a waste. Teams are getting smarter. I think teams are getting smarter, and I'm glad to see that. And I'm glad to see you guys adapting to it. Can I tell you where the allocations are going to land? It might land on 50. 50 might be the number. Maybe it's 48. I don't know what the final number will be. Eventually, it does have to stop. I agree. And I will watch the total points in the economy and we'll figure it out. But you guys are doing a good job. Most of you guys are doing a good job being efficient. I think Sean falls in love too much with it. I told him, I go, Sean, you fall in love way too easy. You got to stop this with some of these giant draft picks that you just want to keep. You can't keep them forever. You got to let them go and re-sign them for a point, or you sign a similar player for a point. So teams have got to fall out of love with their own guys sometimes and be willing to cut the bottom part of their rosters
and you guys are never going to allow it. I would love to see teams have to cut not only the bottom, but maybe a couple guys that you're that feel a little it's unpleasant to cut them. Maybe where every team is going to lose a player or two that they don't want to lose because they can't afford them. But I know you guys don't want to get too crazy with that, so we're not going to go too low. But so for the Barneys and Mocks and Jerry's out there, just, so far you guys are doing well. 52 is not going to kill anyone. Jerry's doing fine. Mox is doing fine. Everyone's in good position.
I was expecting it to go down to like 50 or 51, actually.
I'm going down slow, right? It's the frog in the warm water, right? We're just going nice and slow and easy. But it's gone from, think about 13-point difference from when this started, right? So you guys would have screamed if I went from 65 to 52 or 65 to 50. But the way it's gone, nice and slow, nobody's being affected. Everyone is fine. And some teams are still thriving. So I got a hard time believing I'm making a mistake in this. So far, it's so good.
All right. So we've talked on this
How
one.
about that, Mark?
I let you guys run with that one. We're going to do a quick pivot over to the we're going to talk a little bit about the PCFL, not too much, and then we're going to wrap it up as we'll talk a little bit about PCFL, and then we'll talk about the draft coming up. So doing a quick switch or turn the channel real quick. So PCFL has completed weeks 3 and week 4. So far, the season's been going quite well. I know that we had another team that was taken over by a new coach. And we have some more games coming up this week. So what I want to do real quick is have Dean jump into this, then the status of the league and the new coach that was on board.
Yeah, we actually have excuse me. We actually have 2 new coaches. James has taken Penn State, and Brian has taken Colorado. Brian of Denver and James of Philly. So those teams, we are up to 11 out of 18 teams human coach at this point. So we have 7 open teams. We're aiming to get as many of those 7 taken before we start our recruiting process, and that's going to be an issue of points too, because we're going to use recruiting points to sign recruits, much in the way our free agent situation in the PNFL works. All the recruits are going to be, it's going to be wild. Okay. So, and every team is probably going to have like 100 points to bid to sign, typically anywhere from like 10 to 14 recruits per year that will be, redshirt or true freshmen. That's going to be very interesting. But in the meantime, we have 4 games played. We're playing weeks 5 and 6 this coming weekend. And as usual, there's some interesting matchups. And if I can get it to work, because Mitch has been doing it for us, but if I can get it to work, I'll try to stream some games on Friday night. If there are some folks around that want to watch some games and I can get it to work on my computer. The streaming is kind of fluky on Discord. We'll see. But anyway, we're playing weeks 5 and 6 this week. And then we'll resume just playing 1 game per week. After that, we'll have 6 weeks. It's a 12-game regular season, and then at the end of the regular season, we'll have 8 teams that make the playoffs, kind of like the PNFL. And it's based on the power ranking at the bottom of our standings that the utility creates. So the top 8 teams will be seeded that way, and we'll make the playoffs regardless of conference or divisions, just the top 8 teams by that power ranking. And then we'll play playoffs, and we'll have a national championship game, and someone is going to win it. And then at some point after that, we'll go into our recruiting process. So at that point, the PCFL will be in its off season, and we'll be definitely in the thick of our next PNFL season. So the leagues kind of alternate. One's in off season, one is in full force.
I have a question for you, Dean. Is your off season going to be the entire length of the PNFL season, regular season and playoffs?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the only thing I would imagine, we're probably not going to do this, but if some folks want to say, if some folks want to start the PNFL season, PCFL season, we started the PCFL season right after the Super Bowl. Some folks, in order to have less overlap at the other end, might say, but the teams that are
started after the regular season, right? Started after week 16.
That's something we'll discussion about. But yeah, our only real off-season task in the PCFL is recruiting and training camp, and we'll just kind of gradually take our time doing that during the regular PNFL season.
Right.
Yeah, we'll be kind of done.
How's the new coach doing anyway?
I've offered to help him. He said he's reading up on our rules and doing a lot of informing himself of all that. So I've offered to call him or have him call me and kind of go over some of that stuff. I don't think he's been active in a league before. I think he's kind of dabbled in and played football pro probably on his computer at home. So, so it will take us some time to get up to speed. Obviously, James and Brian are going to just jump in pretty soon and start coaching their teams. So there'll be more.
What's the reason why you're playing 2 weeks? 2 games in a week?
Yeah, that's an idea that Steve proposed. That way, there's less overlap at the end of our season with the PNFL. Yeah, that's all that is.
Okay. Maybe that's why you should start a little earlier, like after the regular season's over, you can begin your season, right?
Yeah, we may look at that timeline and do that instead of doubling up, especially as we have more active coaches. And this is the first season, but in the future, I think 2 things are going to happen. I think the kind of the thing we talked about, people falling in love with their players, that's going to happen as we recruit those players and train them in training camp and develop those players. And, these are players that come into the league with a lot wider gap between their actuals and potentials. That means there's a lot more you can do to mold and shape those players in training camp than sitting there, in the training camp program saying, okay, which of these ratings that need 1 point do I want to max out? Well, here you have players that need 5 and 6 and 7 points per rating. Which of these ratings do I want to put a lot of focus on, or do I just kind of evenly train across the board? Each coach will make those decisions. So these team runners are going to get more attached to their teams as they build and shape them through each additional team of recruiting, and probably get a little more serious. Not that anyone is not serious, but probably focus a little more during that PNFL offseason on winning these PCFL games. And part of it is we're doing very limited custom plays. Part of it is just experimenting with some plays here that we're not officially using a long-term PCFL play pool like Steve did in XFBS, but we allow each team to have 20 custom plays that they can experiment with for that one season. At the end of that season, those plays either get eliminated or they submit them to Charlie as PNFL plays. And if Charlie accepts them as PNFL plays, they're available to all PCFL teams for the following season.
Right.
So it's a very limited custom plays kind of thing, but ultimately the goal is to test them in the PCFL and take them to Charlie and get them added into the PNFL pool. If we have a team owner that doesn't have a team in the in the PNFL, and wants to do custom plays, I guess we'll have to talk about whether some of our coaches that don't submit plays would be willing to submit those plays on that person's behalf. Like if the LSU coach wants to create players and, Mitch doesn't normally create plays, maybe if he decides to start creating plays and create some plays that are good, maybe he could ask Mitch, can you submit these plays in the PNFL? And they get submitted as Houston plays. But the LSU may have developed because Mitch doesn't usually submit plays. They're just given as it might work out that way. But we'll see.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. All right. So we're going to jump to this next. Oh, and the last thing I wanted to say that they didn't, that the guys that Dean left out was looking at the game plays, and I think we talked about a little bit this in pre-show. There is a lot of activity in there as far as a lot of runs after the catch. So it does kind of mimic, and I thought about what Rich has said, where it kind of mimics real college football with some high rushing games, high passing games. The PNFL is more like the NFL, where it's much more tighter. So it does kind of give you that flavor, a little bit more more of a little college vibe. So definitely you can see some
And there are people
games.
who like the college game better. I mean, I think there's a lot of football fans out there who prefer the college game because of the way it looks compared to the NFL. Because it is a little bit more open and free. You know, there's just
more
a
free
little more
flowing,
crazy activity. And so I understand that, but I think that's the way it should be. I think the PNFL should be tighter. I think the college should be more wide open. And like I said, let's go on the high school level. There is mismatches all over the place on the field in high school football. All right, so you can't really, we can't replicate exactly what you guys are looking at with the college game. We can open up the attribute disparity a little bit. A little bit more than we have. And I agree. I think everyone agrees that we want to do that, but not to the extent of the old days. That was my whole point in that forum thing. I don't want to go back to 2003. I don't want to go back. And yes, James is right. I used an exaggerated example of that, but that was reality back then. Having 10, 20, 30, 40 point difference from top to bottom. You can't have that. It's not good for the league to have that. So,
and the way I designed the ratings model in the PCFL was very much, and that's why I put more ratings differentiation in these ratings, because I wanted to produce that result. I wanted it to be more like college football, and it had to be, because when I looked at, we look at college football players as 5-star, 4-star, 3-star, 2-star, and 1-star, and so on. I realized there had to be at least, and I thought it was a modest amount of difference I put in the ratings model, but there had to be some difference between those 5 levels of players. They have to hit certain ratings ranges. So that is why we have difference between an HB1 and an HB3, or your wide receiver 1 and your wide receiver 5, because the computer drafted all the teams in it. The 5-star players went first, then the 4 stars, and then there were a bunch of 3-star players, because they're kind of shaped like a bell curve in distribution, a bunch of 3-star players. So there's real differences in the depth of those players, but the computer did a pretty good job of drafting all the teams pretty much equally, such that there's a great deal of parity where the top team is only like 6 points better than the worst team. It's top to bottom. It's 6 points in ratings that are 600-something points. You're talking 1%. One coach sent an email saying, I'm not sure these ratings are going to work. The starting running back in one team is 15 points better than the other, and that's more difference than you see in the PNFL. And then even in his own figures, he said, well, here's the numbers overall, and I said, yes, that number 18 team is 99% or whatever of the top team. Your numbers prove exactly the opposite of the case you're trying to make to me. And, so there's a great deal of parity. And it does make sense that there's more ratings differentiation in a college league than an NFL league, because that's realistic. And that's why I designed the ratings model to be that way.
And what we talked about earlier, too, is as a team, you're fairly close, 6 points, or whatever, and that's what the PNFL is. But as individual positions, you do have that disparity where, you could have one team with the great running back and other teams with terrible running backs, where there is a wide difference. But it's made up because maybe they have a great wide receiver and this team doesn't. So when you have that kind of mix, it will create what you're seeing on the field. You'll see like a run after the catch. You'll see a missed tackles, because there's mismatches, and that's actually fun to see. And you don't see that in the PNFL.
That's correct. And also, we have a handful of players, they're generally 5-star players in the PCFL. Like, I look at my quarterback, and he's almost as good as Hendon Hooker on my PNFL team.
Right.
And so, that guy could come into the PCFL theoretically as a rookie and be a couple of training camps away from playing. But at the PCFL level, he's at the top of the quarterback ratings right now as player of the week last week, for leading my team on a win against Texas.
Right.
So the top talent in the PCFL, is equivalent, and that's what it was designed to be, equivalent to like first and second round picks in the PNFL. But that's kind of true in college football. Those top players are going to be drafted very highly. Quarterbacks.
I think that's what coaches want to see more of in the PNFL is, and I've complained about this for decades in this league. Is it's frustrating to see every team in the league has 7 or 8 cornerbacks, 7 or 8 wide receivers, and they're really all the same player. They're all within, a point, 2, 3 attribute points. They're all the same. The depth is insane in this league. I really do wish we could, especially with the quarterback position. We all know in the NFL, there's not 30 great quarterbacks. I don't even know if there's 10 great quarterbacks. But we not only have 18, but we may have 35 great quarterbacks. I mean, every team has got backups who could just step right in and do the same job. And that's not really the way it should be. If nothing else, we ought to address the quarterback, since it's the most important position, and make sure that the quarterback, our quarterbacks don't have value anymore. Who's going to take the best quarterback in this draft? Nobody's going to take him.
I think both myself and others included, we kind of fall in love with like certain ratings of players. So, that's why I kind of overreacted and said, that when Mitch created that pool, I said, well, that's the scrub pool. These players at the bottom of that pool are just a bunch of scrubs. And I kind of overreacted. I'll admit that, because, we kind of fall in love with certain players. We want to have cornerbacks at 83, 86. We want wide receivers at 83, 84 speed and 85 or 86 accelerated. We kind of fall in love with those certain ratings, and the players that are lower than that in too many ratings, we look at them and say, oh, that guy's a scrub. I look at my Tennessee team in the PNFL, and I look at like my 5th and 6th receiver. I look at those numbers. I say, these guys look like scrubs. But I watch the game. Those guys catch passes and make plays.
Well, right. They're not scrubs. And that's why in the PNFL, a wide receiver who's 83 speed and 95 hands, he's not a scrub. No, he's not 84, 96. But 83, 95 is going to get the job done. And we have a ton of those guys, right? So there's too many of those guys. I mean, really, do the NFL teams really have 5, 6 deep in wide receiver? No, they have 1, maybe 2 if they're lucky.
Yeah, 2 if they're lucky.
After that, it's usually a drop-off. I mean, so I think that's where the frustration is with the coaches, where we all want parity, but we also want to see some differentiation in the attributes, where a wide receiver 1 truly is a wide receiver 1, where, Mark, let's say you're 7-4 heading into the deadline, and you need a wide receiver. Well, you could throw a dart at the wall and just go get any of these wide receivers all over the league. But instead, you'd love to be able to, I'm going to go target the 1-11 Packers, let's say, who's got the top 3 wide receiver in the league, and he's a stud, where you have to make a real trade for a real wide receiver and pay a real price for him. That doesn't exist in our league, because the value of these guys is diminished because they're all identical. Right. And so I think that's what frustrates coaches with the players.
All right, so we're going to pivot to our last segment because we are running a little long on time. As we've gone through those 2. Upcoming this week, everyone knows or should know what's coming up. On Friday at 9 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time is our draft. So with the time that we have left, roughly about 10 minutes or less, let's go ahead and talk about the draft coming up, and we will start with, obviously, the commish.
Well, I'm going to pull a Mitch on you, and I'm going to defer first talking. Let Dean go first, because Dean has scouted the draft way more than I have, and so I'll let him go first.
All right, go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, I will say that, one, just real quickly, I'll say, for many of us, including me, this is one of our favorite times of the entire season to come into the draft and draft players, especially when we have some draft picks to spend. And I have some pretty good draft picks and plan to, I think I'm putting 5 or 6 of these guys on the active roster. And then I have a few picks that are the lower round, 6th or 7th round players that will go to practice squad. But, there's some key positions I'm looking to fill. And as many of us, looking at a couple of players that, I really want to bring that guy into my roster and imagine him being in my lineup or whatever. And I think most of us do that when we come into the draft, and it's always fun. And, last year it moved very fast. We were doing the draft on the forum, and we were on WhatsApp and Discord, and it allowed us to communicate more quickly. You're up, your pick is up. you're on the clock, and it moved very fast. And we went through the draft in a record amount of time this past time. And, there was talk about, well, maybe we should do 3 rounds on the forum and finish it one afternoon on draft stock or whatever. Now there's no talk about ever using draft stock again. The forum drafts have been absolutely wonderful. It gives people a time to kind of look at your things and take a few minutes to make wise choices rather than being like on the clock on draft stock. You got 2 minutes, you got to put a pick in, or the little alarm goes off and says you haven't made your pick. So I think overall it's not adding that much time to the preseason to do the draft in the forum, but I think it's adding much more to the quality of our picks. And I know teams are drafting much better. A lot of teams are doing a very good job of scouting the draft pool and drafting. And, this draft pool is considerably smaller overall size, but there are still some good players and some good positions to be filled with some of these players. And I know that a lot of people are looking at, there's certainly a couple of key players in defense that people are looking at. There's a defensive end there, a linebacker, a couple of cornerbacks, and those are probably at minimum will be gone in the top 10. I would say between the best defensive end and the best linebacker, I could see those 2 players going 1 and 2, depending on what those teams need. But I kind of have a feeling in the first 5 players is probably going to be 2 offensive players and 3 defensive players is what I see happening at this point among the top 5.
Okay. All right, Rich, you're up.
Well, the last draft we finished in 33 hours on the forum, which was a record. I'm not asking, we don't have to repeat that. I don't really like when it goes too fast where people are pressuring the next guy. So hopefully we don't get into that mode where, we've waited 15 minutes. Where the hell are you? Let's not let it get into that. But last year was amazing. It was 33 hours, 31 minutes, which is remarkable for us, actually. But I do agree, Dean, that the draft is the one part that I miss as a coach and as a GM. I miss the draft. This is the opportunity to, make some smart picks and find some guys, find some value, down in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th round. So I do miss that. As far as what's available in there, I really haven't gone through it. I in a quick scan, obviously I see a defensive end who looks pretty darn good. I see some offensive linemen. They don't normally go at the top, but I do see some offensive linemen here, who are looking pretty good. The linebacker you mentioned, I see a cornerback who looks pretty good. So it looks like there's a pretty good spread of talent. Wide receiver, Marvin Harrison Jr. looks pretty good, and he's ready to play right now. So, that's someone's going to get a good wide receiver. So it should be good. It looks like Dean, you and Justin, I believe, are the only 2 teams with multiple picks in the first round. Is that accurate?
I think so, yeah.
Justin has number 3 and number 14, and you have number 4 and number 16, right? Right. So you guys will be the big winners, or should be. Green Bay is going to take the defensive end probably. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that looks likely. That looks plausible.
I think you're probably going to, just looking real quick scan, I think you're going to see defense go at the top. It wouldn't surprise me if defense went 1, 2, at least top 4, top 5 will be defense, I think. I see a safety here who looks real good, and I know teams don't normally like to draft safeties that early, but this guy is real good. So I could see I could see a defensive end going, a safety going, a linebacker, and a cornerback. Those could be your first 4 picks, those 4 positions. So we'll see, unless someone wants to take an offensive lineman, which they don't normally like to do, but there are a couple tackles who look good. There's some guards who look good. So I'm going to go with defense as the early theme of the draft. So that's all I have, Mark, because I haven't really gone into the draft detail. I don't scout the draft, obviously, since I don't have a team. I'm not picking players, so
right.
I really don't break it down like I used to.
All right. All right, guys. So, actually, we're right on time. So, as we come to wrap this week's show up, obviously, there's a lot going on, a lot of information that's been put out there. Welcome to the 2 new coaches that we have in the PCFL. You guys keep the free agency moving right along, keeping Rich busy, and then as we move over into the draft, it's going to be interesting to see how long it takes, because even though we did have record time, and like you said, Rich, you had a lot of people saying, okay, been 15 minutes. They may try to push, been 10 minutes, so they want to try to hurry up and get through that, get through the training camp, and then get their roster set, then get ready to start playing football. So I understand the reason why they're trying to do it, but it should be an interesting weekend coming up. So as we come up to wrap this up, we're going to hit the table one more time. We're going to start off with our guest this week. Rich, any final words?
It's been a pleasure, Mark. I always enjoy doing the show. I mean, I know I can't fill Mitch's shoes, but I do the best I can.
It's much more laid back. We don't have to deal with the banter and the harassing and all the other stuff, because we're I don't know if we're getting a break this week or if Mitch is getting a break this week. I don't know. So we'll see. Yep. Oh, and one quick note. We will not be having a show next week. I will be out of town, so I will not be available. I will not have my gear with me for that trip.
You don't have a guest host lined up to do the show?
I don't have a guest lined up, and unless Mitch or Dean has the equipment to run the show, or they can do a live stream, that could be interesting. Do a live stream for the show and have everyone join in on Discord. That would be interesting.
Could you? But we don't have a guest producer to take your place.
You got you can use Rich. He can put on another hat. He can pick one more hat up for 1 week. So
I mean, Johnny Carson, when he took the week off, I mean, he had Joan Rivers sit in and all sorts of celebrities sit in for him.
And we have
you have to have a team of people to step in.
No, we got you. You're good enough. You're good enough.
You're going to get Charlie to increase the budget to fund that.
Well, see, that would be a Charlie question. Charlie needs to increase the budget.
That's right.
All right.
Well, the production value won't be as good, but someone could easily press the record button and just record a conversation.
There you go. It's just 1 week, guys. It's just 1 week.
There you go.
All right. Dean, any final words for you? Take us out of here.
Yeah, I will just point out that there are 10 of us that own teams in both the PNFL and the PCFL. So this week, this show would be good to listen to as the 10 of us are both preparing our draft boards for Friday. It's opening 9 in the morning Eastern time. That's 6 o'clock my time out here in the Pacific Northwest. So as we're preparing our final preparations on our draft board and working on game plans for the PCFL games this weekend, this show will be good to listen to. And that being said, there's nothing left to do but let's get it.